And it is also a choice to hold this sham hearing today instead of bringing Secretary Noem to answer for the unlawful abuses of power the American people have experienced under her leadership. This tells me everything that I need to know, so I have no questions for these witnesses, just one question for Secretary Noem. When will you stop hiding behind your subordinates, ma'am? And
this may look like a heated partisan exchange over agency funding, but it's actually a confrontation about whether executive power still answers to constitutional oversight. What's really being tested here is whether congressional authority means anything when top officials decline to appear and defend their decisions in public. This raises broader questions about accountability, funding priorities, and the balance between enforcement power and civil protections. In this video, we'll break down what this moment reveals about institutional responsibility, the limits of executive discretion, and whether oversight in Washington is becoming optional rather than mandatory.
Let's be clear about why we are here. Republicans have allowed ICE and Border Patrol to operate out of control, abuse their authority, trample civil rights, break the law, violate the Constitution, and kill U.S. citizens, all while lying to the public about actions we can plainly see with our own eyes. So if my Republican colleagues were serious about keeping the American people safe, we'd be discussing how to protect citizens from their own government. Today, we should be hearing from Secretary Noem and the leaders of the agencies that are terrorizing and killing Americans. Instead, we're having the sham hearing with Republicans trying to shift blame, even though our Democratic leadership has already offered a funding proposal with safeguards to protect Americans from misconduct by federal agents. It seems the White House would rather shut down agencies like FEMA during historic winter storms than accept the bare minimum of accountability and transparency for ICE and Border Patrol. So here we are. Just to level set, Secretary Noem has not appeared before this committee since last year, before her agents killed Renee Good and Alex Preddy, before Greg Bovino terrorized my constituents in Illinois during Operation Midway Blitz, before more than 170 U.S. citizens were illegally detained by federal agents, before 5-year-old Liam Ramos was snatched on his way home from school because ICE wanted to use him as bait, and before countless other atrocities were committed on her watch. So where is she today? Since day one, Secretary Noem has violated our Constitution and the oath that she took to defend it. DHS's leader behaves as though congressional oversight is optional, and her negligence is enabled by my Republican colleagues. That negligence is apparent across the department. 4 out of the 5 DHS components represented here today are being run by acting officials, not because qualified leaders don't exist, but because Republicans have abandoned even the pretense of governing. And now, after failing to confirm permanent leaders, refusing congressional oversight, and starving the components that they do not care about, Republicans want to lecture this subcommittee about the impacts of a shutdown on the agencies that they have neglected all along. I don't think that's going to fool the American people. The real Republican priorities are painfully obvious. My constituents can understand what it means that FEMA recently denied Illinois' request for a major disaster declaration after severe storms. And Mr. Phillips, I'm not going to waste our time today asking you why this decision was made. I think we all know why. My constituents can see what is happening here. They paid their federal taxes, but now that they need help to rebuild, FEMA tells them, sorry, you're on your own. That's not a result of a funding lapse. That is a policy choice. It is a policy choice that reflects a pattern of governance that treats some missions and some communities as expendable. Apparently, the Trump administration has enough money for immigration agents to rappel down from helicopters to raid an apartment building on Chicago's South Side, resulting in 0 criminal charges, but not to address flooding when heavy rain overwhelmed the sewer system a few miles away. And under Kristi Noem's failed leadership, it is not just disaster response that's getting shortchanged in order to pay for the secret police terrorizing American communities. Cybersecurity, transportation security, maritime safety, our nation's most valuable resources and secrets, all being sold out by the Trump administration. Meanwhile, agencies like Border Patrol and ICE, whose actions are opposed by 63% of American voters, got a blank check in the big ugly bill last summer, and now my Republican colleagues want to give them another one with no strings attached. So please, Please spare us the fiction of Republican concern about paying federal employees or sustaining critical resources. This is not about resources, this is about choices. And it is also a choice to hold this sham hearing today instead of bringing Secretary Noem to answer for the unlawful abuses of power the American people have experienced under her leadership. This tells me everything that I need to know, so I have no questions for these witnesses, just one question for Secretary Noem. When will you stop hiding behind your subordinates, ma'am, and come explain yourself to this committee? And with 2 seconds left, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
To the gentlelady from Illinois, strong work. Thank you very much.
The room fell silent as Representative Lauren Underwood delivered her final words, not to the witnesses seated before her, but to the absent secretary herself. When will you stop hiding behind your subordinates, ma'am, and come explain yourself to this committee? It was not framed as a partisan jab. It was framed as a demand for accountability, a demand for presence, a demand for leadership. Moments earlier, Underwood had laid out a blistering indictment. She accused ICE and Border Patrol of operating without constraint. She described what she characterized as civil rights violations, constitutional breaches, and federal agents acting beyond their lawful authority. She cited instances of alleged illegal detentions. She referenced specific names. She spoke of federal actions in Illinois that she argued left her constituents fearful and unprotected. And she questioned why, after so many serious allegations, the secretary had not appeared before the committee to answer directly. But the most powerful moment was not the catalog of accusations. It was the absence she pointed to, the empty chair, the missing testimony. The official who, in her view, had not stood before elected representatives to defend or explain the department's conduct. This was not simply a dispute over immigration enforcement or disaster funding. It was a confrontation over the structure of accountability in American government. Underwood's remarks framed the issue as a choice about priorities, a choice about transparency, and a choice about whether oversight is optional or mandatory in a constitutional republic. She argued that funding decisions reflect values, that denying disaster assistance while expanding enforcement budgets sends a message. That governance is not neutral. It signals whose security matters most and whose suffering is negotiable. She described FEMA's denial of Illinois' request for a major disaster declaration not as a bureaucratic delay, but as a policy decision, a conscious allocation of resources, a reflection of what she believes are the administration's true priorities. And then she turned the lens outward. She suggested that oversight has been sidelined, that acting officials run key components of the department, that permanent leadership has not been confirmed. In her telling, this was not coincidence. It was a pattern. Whether one agrees with her assessment or not, the intensity of the exchange reveals something deeper about this political moment. Trust in institutions is fragile. Public confidence in enforcement agencies is contested terrain. And when cabinet-level officials do not appear before congressional committees amid controversy, it raises a fundamental question. Who answers to the people? Underwood framed the issue in stark moral language. She spoke of constitutional oaths, of public servants' duty to defend civil liberties, of the responsibility to appear before elected representatives when summoned. She did not ask the witnesses in the room for clarifications. She reserved her final seconds for the absent secretary. That choice was symbolic. In the architecture of American democracy, oversight is not theater. It is not optional. It is a core mechanism designed to prevent concentration of power. Congress funds agencies. Congress authorizes programs. Congress conducts hearings precisely so that policies can be examined under public scrutiny. When that process falters, whether due to partisanship, scheduling, or strategic avoidance, the balance of power tilts. The broader context makes this moment even more charged. Immigration enforcement remains one of the most divisive issues in American politics. So does disaster relief, so does executive authority. The intersection of those debates, layered with allegations of misconduct and competing narratives about public safety, produces hearings like this one, tense, accusatory, and emotionally loaded. Yet beneath the rhetoric lies a simple democratic principle. Leaders must answer questions. Underwood's closing line, asking when the secretary would stop hiding behind your subordinates, crystallized that principle into a single pointed challenge. It spoke to a frustration shared by many voters across ideological lines, the perception that powerful officials can act without direct consequence or explanation. For supporters of the administration, these hearings may look like partisan attacks designed to undermine enforcement efforts. For critics, they may represent a necessary check on executive power. But regardless of perspective, the exchange underscores how high the stakes have become. Because when trust erodes, it does not erode in isolation. It affects disaster response. It affects border policy. It affects cybersecurity, transportation security, and public confidence in institutions that operate largely out of sight. It affects whether citizens believe their government serves them equally or selectively. In the end, this hearing was not only about ICE, FEMA, or departmental leadership. It was about visibility, about accountability, about whether those entrusted with immense authority are willing to stand before the people's representatives and defend their decisions in full daylight. The gavel may fall, the cameras may shut off, but the question remains: who answers to the American people? In a constitutional republic, the answer must always be the same: everyone, because democracy does not sustain itself on silence. It sustains itself on scrutiny, on transparency, on leaders willing to show up, take responsibility, and defend their record before the nation they serve. And as this debate continues, in committee rooms, on the House floor, and across communities from Illinois to the southern border, one truth remains clear: accountability is not a partisan demand. It is a democratic requirement. This is Liberty Report USA. If you believe oversight matters, if you believe transparency strengthens the republic, and if you believe leadership means standing before the people, subscribe to Liberty Report USA and support our work to expose the truth.